address the systemic and existential crisis facing us today. And that includes urgently combating climate change and making sure every American has a safe and decent place to call home. Bernie Sanders said at a press conference, with the Capitol building making a splendid backdrop. Now, briefly, folks, right? The existential crisis facing us today. I would say, frankly, that the existential crisis is the fact that these woke, corrupt systems are destroying Western civilization. I'd say the fact that over and over again, the system these people try to promote has destroyed civilization after civilization. That it has led to genocide and famine and tyranny over and over and over again. And for some reason, these folks still seem to think it's a great idea. I'd say that pattern recognition is one of the core tenets, core foundations of basic human logic. And for some reason, people who seem to believe in socialism lack that ability of pattern recognition, right? But regardless, folks, a place for every American to live, a decent place to call home. Frankly, I wish they'd stop destroying the decency of our homes. But regardless, this is what they're saying, right? And they continue saying it is unacceptable that on a single given night in America, over 650,000 people are homeless. Look, I have an idea. Call me crazy. But maybe instead of giving free houses and free food and so on to 7 million illegal aliens, they could actually give houses to homeless instead. Or maybe they should treat American homeless people with at least similar decency as they do to illegal aliens. I don't know why, for example, that they're forcing out veteran services to house illegal immigrants. I don't know, for example, why they're flooding them into poor neighborhoods all across the United States. I don't know why they're buying up hotel rooms for them. But again, they're doing that. They could actually model the same thing. Maybe, hey, deport the illegal aliens and offer the same services they were getting to the allegedly 650,000 people homeless people. I'll say personally, though, I don't think that solves anything. I don't think subsidizing a problem fixes a problem. And frankly, I'd say that's the biggest gap in this whole narrative, frankly. They think that if you have a fire and you pour enough money on it, magically the fire is going to go out instead of burning up all that money. If a person's homeless, oftentimes, and there's some exceptions to this, but oftentimes it's caused by poor decisions they have made. If you want to fix their situation, you have to fix the problems that caused it. And if you don't fix the problems that caused it, it's going to repeat itself no matter how much money you pour onto it. And we've seen that over and over again, frankly. If people don't want to change themselves, they're not going to change. And you can pour all the money you want into the problem. It's not going to fix the individual and the problems they have that led to the outcome they're experiencing. And if you try to eliminate failure by subsidizing it, failure doesn't go away. All you do is subsidize failing lifestyles, failing habits, and failing systems. That is one of the core flaws in socialism, over and over again. But regardless, Bernie Sanders, who lacks pattern recognition on understanding the history of socialism, says it is unacceptable that in the richest country in the history of the world, people are choosing between paying rent and putting food on the table. I would add on that one of the reasons we have to choose between paying rent and putting food on the table is because of the high competition for housing caused mostly by mass illegal immigration. It is recognized as being the main cause of rising house prices in Canada. Why do we not recognize that here in the United States? Why can we not talk about it here? In Canada, which is to the left of America, Canada is like if San Francisco was a country, right? That's Canada. They acknowledge that the rising housing costs in Canada are being caused by mass migration. They understand that when you have a limited supply of something and you double or triple or quadruple the demand for that limited supply, the prices go up. And when you have limited numbers of houses and you flood the country with more people demanding that same pool of housing, prices are going to go up. The costs of living are going up because of these bad policies. And then we're seeing inflation because of overspending. If they want to fix this problem, you don't subsidize it. You don't tax people more and make their lives even harder. You don't dig us deeper into the trench they're digging. No. If you want to fix the problem, you make people's lives easier by taxing them less and alleviating the pressure that you've artificially placed on top of them. Maybe, again, deport the illegal immigrants, or at the very least clear some of the federal policies and even local policies that restrict, the building of new homes. Make it so that people can more easily construct housing if you want to fix that problem. Don't, again, restrict that. Make it so that if they pour $1 million into building housing for, let's homeless people, they end up building like 3 tiny homes for $1 million, and then they never open anyways, which is what you have in California. They'll spend $1 million building a glorified porta potty because of all the red tape and regulations, and say, look at the great job we did. We're building services for homeless people. Yeah, money well spent, right? But regardless, folks, it says here, the federal government has spent $1 trillion on constructing and subsidizing public housing since the 1970s. That's 50 years of failure to decently house low-income people. Again, it is subsidized failure. And they say there are other ways to subsidize public housing, but the federal government is stuck simply and mindlessly throwing money at the problem. But back on this bill, Green New Deal Chapter 2, it says the bill would authorize $162 billion to $234 billion over the next 10 years to enhance and expand public housing with climate change-centric policies. Maybe, folks, we'll finally get those pods to live in, right? Maybe we'll finally get those nice little pods that they've been promising us. That's, of course, according to Washington Examiner. It says that squad member Jamal Bowman thinks that the Green New Deal 2 for housing, along with the Green New Deal for public schools, will be a form of reparations. I assume that means he wants to put, former people who've come from histories of slavery in those. I assume he doesn't mean Irish people or things like that. But regardless, he says, I also want to plug, we must also pass the Green New Deal for public schools, because the Green New Deal for public schools, working in conjunction with the Green New Deal for public housing, is a form of reparations for our historically marginalized communities, Bowman said during the speech. Folks, I kind of want some reparations for the money we're sending to every corner of the face of the planet. I kind of want some reparations for the badly spent tax dollars we have subsidizing the invasion of our country with mass illegal immigration. I would kind of like some reparations for the poorly spent tax dollars we have on issue after issue. I think that'd be great. Maybe a big old tax return on all the misappropriated funds, right? But regardless, this is what they're talking about. And also when they talk about, for example, the school systems, remember, the more money they've poured into it, they're not fixing the problems, they're oftentimes subsidizing the problems. Look at what happened with public education and even basic literary rates since the formation of the Department of Education. It's gone like this. You would think that the creation of the Department of Education would have made the quality of education go up. Why did it instead go down? Well, one of the reasons is when you subsidize a problem, you entrench the problem. You do not fix the problem. You have poor communities in Detroit and Chicago and so on like that, where they're spending $40,000 a year on students. And we find that the quality of education is some of the worst in the country. We find literary rates are some of the worst in the country. Why is that? Why is it that despite giving almost double the amount of money to some of these areas per child, the quality of education is actually worse? Again, I'll go back to the point that just subsidizing it does not fix it. You have to fix the problem at its core. And I don't know what that may be in those cases, but frankly, we can say the way it's been being done is not working.
Get the
Teachers'
federal
unions
government out
having
of
the
it.
old golden rice bowls that can't be taken away from them. Teachers who can't be fired if they do their jobs wrong. Schools that don't go out of business if they fail. If you make it private, on the other hand, if the quality of education doesn't work, parents look for a better option. And when they find a better option, they keep doing that until they find something that works. Normally, the free market lets things fail. And if you don't let things fail, frankly, you're going to be subsidizing a failed system, and you're going to live in a failed system. You have to let things that do not work fail. And in this case, I'd say a lot of the public school systems have, in fact, failed. They're being prevented from going through the process of failing and then reforming through subsidized programs like this, rather than, of course, maybe giving parents the money to use the money elsewhere. Let them get into private schools elsewhere. Use, for example, charter schools. Maybe don't regulate everything and think a one-size-fits-all model is going to fix the whole problem. That is the problem, again, of this dictatorial, tyrannical policy of trying to manage everything from the top and not recognizing the unique situations on the ground that is one of the cornerstones of socialism. Hey, welcome back. Election officials may refuse to certify the 2024 elections, and frankly, I'd say there's a very real chance of it. This is one of the big scare scenarios that mainly the Democrats and corporate media are pushing. And I would actually say, based on evidence, it's not without some ground. Let me show you first a few headlines, though, that have been going around actually for a while now. New York Times in October of 2022 said this. They said it's 2024, Trump backers won't certify the elections. What next legally? Raising concerns over what happens, right? The Associated Press in November of 2022 said this. Election certification delays few, but a test run for 2024. And they were suggesting at the time during the midterms, of course, that what we were seeing was some officials refusing to certify the elections could become a model for 2024. Washington Post said just last year, November 2023, can Congress refuse to certify a Biden win? Answers to your 2024 questions. MSNBC also last year said this. They said, Republican refusal to certify local election results seen as a dress rehearsal for 2024 chaos. Now look, basically this is what it said. The general narrative is that election officials could just refuse to certify the 2024 elections if Biden wins. And this could be on a lot of different grounds. You know, maybe they believe that Biden stole the election, or if they believe that illegal aliens have found ways to vote and we can't certify the election because of it. Or they believe there were other issues that caused too many doubts around the integrity of the elections. There need to be actual investigations before they're willing to certify. Because you can't certify an election technically if there's plausible reason to believe it was rigged. Basically, that's what the law is. But they're suggesting that if you maybe just ignore all the weird things that happen, that's the right way to do it, and that if you have problems with it, that, again, the protections in place legally in the United States that let you question the integrity of something, that if you believe there's fraud, you don't certify it, right? They're saying that that could be an act of fraud itself. Remember, one of the reasons why that power even exists is to make sure that anomalies, like frankly what we watched Democrats do over and over again in 2020, and I'll say right now, I 100% believe Biden rigged the 2020 elections. Based on all the evidence I've seen, they massively rigged the elections. And I'd say that officials who certified that election while ignoring all that evidence, and you have people say, well, the courts reject, the courts didn't even look into it. The courts didn't even investigate. They didn't even look into the evidence. And the cases where they have looked into the evidence, they did find there was fraud. But again, the possibility of election officials refusing to certify the election is not that far out. So there is some credibility to this. Look, as they noted, there were some in the 2022 midterms who refused to certify the elections. Let me show you, just as a flashback to this, this is how ProPublica described their reasoning. They said, again, 2022, right? During the midterms. A week and a half after last November's vote, members of the Board of Elections in Surry County, North Carolina, gathered in a windowless room to certify the results. And again, the reason we have this process is to make sure that a rigged election is not certified. That is the purpose of this. That is why this process exists. That is why these powers exist. But they say, it was supposed to be a routine task, marking the end of a controversial season during which election deniers harassed and retaliated against the country's elections director. Not long into the meeting, however, a staffer distributed a letter from two board members stating they were refusing to certify. The reason, they said, quote, in their view, a federal judge who'd struck down a North Carolina voter ID law for discriminating against minorities had transformed the state's election laws into a grotesque and perverse sham. Well, heck, I'd agree with that. Eliminate the processes to make sure that fraud doesn't take place. How do you know that fraud doesn't take place? If you believe that the elections were under threat, why would you get rid of the protections on the elections? Well, if they believe Trump is going to steal the elections, why don't they put in signature verification? Why don't they put in, voter ID? Why don't they take steps to make sure that illegal aliens are not voting in local elections? Why instead are they doing the opposite? Why have universal mail-in ballots? Why allow, for example, ballot harvesting? If you believe there are threats to something, normally you would increase security, not reduce it. And that raises some questions over what the real thinking of some of these folks is. If they believe that the threat to the election is not, for example, a threat to the mail-in ballots or signatures and so on, if they believe that instead the threat to the election is if people have problems with removing the security of the election, I'd question the entire narrative. Because how would making something less secure be deemed an act of integrity? And how would making something being less secure and people having a problem with that the people having a problem with it would be the problem you're looking at, right? It's like a thief saying, this person is guilty of robbing this home because he's putting locks on his doors to prevent me from robbing his home. Like, what kind of deranged logic is this, frankly, right? If you put locks on your home, you're obviously concerned about thieves, therefore you must be a thief, right? Like, this is the deranged logic you see at play here. Obviously, Republicans must be trying to rig the elections because they're trying to make the elections more secure. Sounds a bit fishy to me, folks. But regardless, one of the individuals says, Tim Deeren, one of the two board members who signed the letter, explained at the meeting, quote, "We feel the election was held according to law that we have, but that the law is not right." In other words, they feel the laws were altered to allow things that should not have been legal in the first place. If you legalize crime, is it still a crime? If you legalize fraud, is it still fraud? Well, observing these acts, I would say it is something of concern, frankly. And I'd say that just legalizing something that should be illegal in order to weaken the integrity of a system, you can still question the integrity of the system. But they say that election law experts say that these disruptions reveal a weakness in the American electoral system, which relies on thousands of local officials to certify the totals in their counties and municipalities before their results can be aggregated and tallied for state and federal elections. And they say local election officials, quote, could create chaos all the way up the chain by refusing to certify, said Alice Clapman, a senior counsel in election law at the Brennan Center for Justice. Now, look, some officials have also signaled that they may not certify the 2024 elections. In other words, we're already actually kind of seeing this. It's not a concern that is without cause. There are people saying that they may not certify the 2024 elections, given the circumstances and depending what happens. Frankly, I'd say that making a statement ahead of time that you would certify an election regardless of evidence of fraud is not an act in line with the basic duty of that role. In fact, the very reason that that role exists is to be the gatekeeper, to make sure that a rigged election is not certified, or to make sure that if fraud takes place, that it gets held to account. The purpose of that role is to be discerning, and they should not, at least in my opinion, agree to certify something regardless of what takes place. They should say, I'll see what the evidence is. Look, I'm not going to say I'm going to let the thief go even if he steals. If he steals something, I'll arrest him, right? If he steals something, I'll arrest him. But if he doesn't, I'm not going to arrest him, right? If a crime takes place, yes, it'll be a problem. If it doesn't, there won't. And yes, if they rig the elections, and I believe they did, I'm not going to certify it. But if it's fine, I won't, stop it. How is that a bad thing? But again, this is where the controversy all is right now. You can take, for example, the controversy with Republican Representative Elise Stefanik. The Hill said this: Representative Elise Stefanik, a Republican from New York, on Sunday stopped short of saying she will certify the 2024 election results, saying she will, quote, see if this year's election is legal and valid. So she's saying that she'll certify the elections if it's legal and valid, and that's problematic? That's controversial? How is saying you'll certify an election if it's legal and valid controversial? Of course, the implication being they're saying that she stopped short of saying that she would not certify it. The implication of that being if it's not legal and not valid. So why would they want her to certify a not legal and not valid election? Why would they want her to agree to certify regardless of legality and validity? But they say that pressed on the NBC News, show Meet the Press over whether she will vote to certify the 2024 election results, no matter what the result is, no matter what, even if it's not legal or not valid. They said this, right? Stefanik said, "We will see if this is a legal and valid election." How is that a controversial statement? How is that controversial, folks? Regardless. Look, there's the ironic other side to this, though, that the corporate media have been suggesting, ironically, that House Democrats could just act on their own and they could choose to not certify the 2024 elections even if Donald Trump wins the election. Well, everyone, that's all for tonight. Thank you for joining us, and as always, please take care of yourselves, stay informed,